Yeah, this one started out as a solo thing that I was doing, and we thought it could work really well in a duo. So this duo heavily features the Sunhouse sensory percussion. Yeah, and Sunhouse created this instrument that's a hardware and a software. So the hardware is what's on my drums, these sensors. I have one on the snare drum, one on the kick drum. And it's also a software. So this is feeding information into Alex's computer that basically both of us can manipulate. So in this song, I'm doing obviously the drums, most of the percussion stuff, and I'm covering the bass on this particular track. Yeah, so again, I'm sending my acoustic drums, and this drum pad are sending information to Alex's computer, and it changes the sounds that normally come out of my drums. Yeah, so for instance, my drum has some percussion on it. But when Alex holds down another note on his keyboard, which is it could be any MIDI controller, it changes the sounds that are coming from my drum. So. Yeah, so it creates this really cool hybrid sound where I'm playing my acoustic drum, but it's something that's never come out of my drums before, this instrument. So it's kind of a trip in that sense because I'm used to hearing certain things that are just completely different. It's really inspiring. With improvisation, we associate it with vocabulary and playing changes and things like that. But in this setting, we're kind of using just a different set of tools to grab from. For instance,
Totally.
Samples, sound effects. One sound effect being, in this song, we're using reverb as an improvisation tool. And in this specific song, the reverb is on the rim of my snare drum. And when I hit the drum louder, it creates more of a reverb. So reverb is just like space. Like if you imagine you're a big room and you just clap, that sound that follows is reverb. So for instance, but when I play louder, yeah, it feels...
The reverb increases more as you play louder. Just like you would in like a natural space too. You know, it's like something plays louder, the reverb gets louder. And, you know, sometimes you need to like accentuate that a little bit. So we actually programmed the computer to say that, okay, when Micah plays louder on the rim of the snare drum, then we're going to amplify the reverb even more so that when he hits it, it creates this huge space. Drummers are my favorite instrumentalists. They're my favorite musicians in general. A lot of my best friends are drummers, so I have a deep connection to them. And with the sensory percussion software, since I'm not a drummer, it's, you know, I feel like there's a barrier between like being a music producer and a drummer and using this software. And I really like the software, and I really wanted to, you know, figure out some things to do to like get some expressive things out of the drums. Like for instance, when Micah is playing the drums, it's like, I want to set up some sounds that like draw the most out of his playing. So like, what are those particular sounds for me? If you want to go ahead and play the snare drum like loud and soft. Yeah, so it's just like a basic octave thing that kind of works over all of the chord changes. But as it's a little bit subtle with the sample, but as you know, he plays louder, the sample itself gets louder too. So that's what's great about the sensory percussion too, is that it's very nuanced and there's a lot of room for expression. So for me, it's like, okay, like having that as like your, like, say that's like your tune, like that for me, that's the framework that we're able to work in. So basically I just listened to him play it a bunch and, you know, came up with some different synth sounds that I feel like could be interchangeably added in over the top of each other, taken out, depending on, you know, the feeling of like where we're going and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just want to go ahead, I can go ahead and play the snare drum again. So then all of these like technically should be able to be stacked like this.
Yeah, another example is that is being I can control when the section changes actually. So this pad up here, I'm using again to send MIDI information to the computer, and I can change when I hit that pad, it selects what bass notes and what chords are playing. So here we go. That's one section, and then I have the bass notes on this pad. Yeah, and I kind of, those bass notes cycle, so they go in a row. This is the bass line. And then when I hit this again, it switches to the next section. And this is the next bass line.
And then I start adding things in. Yeah. So the really fun thing about this one in particular is this system for doing the bass lines, which is basically that when Micah plays the kick drum, depending on what MIDI note I'm holding is what note we'll be playing, and it will also be playing exactly at the same time that he hits the kick drum. So if you hit right, there's one note, there's another note, there's a third note. And what's also cool about that is that when it's the bass note will only do that if I'm holding down the note that it's assigned to. So if you keep on hitting the kick, nothing, then nothing. It's not like every single kick drum has to have a bass note, which is sometimes when you hear like electronic drums that do that kind of thing, it's like, oh, every single kick has the bass note change or something like that. It gets a little bit old, even though I kind of let every single one on that last take happen. But it's nice to have the option in order to do that, so that if he's doing like Micah's very elegant with his playing, so he can do some nice velocity, conscious bass drum taps. And it's nice to be able to, like, for me to be like, okay, like the bass notes need to be accented in this part of the bar, not so as much in this part of the bar, so I can let go of the bass note. And also that lets me keep in line with the chord changes of the guitar loop.
Yeah, the bass stuff kind of speaks to the process a little bit too, which is a little bit unconventional for this. Yeah, the process with this one was we started with the guitar loop and we just had that going, and I basically played a drum solo over the guitar loop. There's kind of like a core rhythmic structure to it, but I kind of just played a drum solo over the guitar loop. And what we did is we recorded the electronic MIDI, the MIDI information. We recorded that and then went back through and added sounds to the MIDI information that we had recorded. So we basically recorded a bunch of blank stuff and then kind of like a collage, we went through and added sounds based off what I had played. And then from there, we had to figure out, well, how are we going to play this live? And it's more challenging when you're doing it live for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of the challenges was the bass part. Like, the bass notes need to change as the loop is happening. So you can't just slap one note on the kick drum and have it play the same thing the whole time. So we had to figure out a way to do that. And that was, Alex being able to control which notes I'm playing in real time. We did a few songs like this at the very beginning of quarantine, which we lived together. It was a really fun process to kind of like start with, literally like a blank canvas, and then just go in and fill everything in from there, and then deconstruct that to how do we perform this live.
Totally, yeah. And it's like one of those things too where it was kind of like exactly like a blank space, because it was like, okay, we have this guitar loop and then we have all this MIDI information and the drums, and it's like, okay, now we can think about like what textures like and what types of sounds like go into that. And that's really like the name of the game for this for me, is like having an arsenal of textures like set up, ready to go, just as you would like, if you go to a jam session, like you practice before you go to a jam session, hopefully, and like have some like vocabulary and stuff to play. For this type of project, it's like the samples are the vocabulary. So you have these things like set up and ready to go, so that when we get to playing, I can trigger them in and out and have a lot of control over like when things are happening. But this one was super fun in particular, just to like reverse engineer it and like do like a whole nother process. It's like, okay, we made the whole track. Now, like, how do we like get back and play it? And a lot of this, it's like, it's stripping it down to like some core elements. Like there's some things in the track. There's like some like drum production stuff that would be like cool to eventually maybe try to do some things live. But the thing about this too is that these are always, for me, like I can hear like other things that can go on top of this like already, like as we just played it this last time. So it's like everything's a work in progress. Everything can be manipulated to be like improvised with.
Yeah, and another interesting thing about this one too is that we kind of snuck in some like musical cues. So like for instance, the guitar loop kind of builds. I have different ones set up here, so like it can. It's all the same thing, but it just kind of builds a little bit. But when the guitar loop is playing, and I add this little horn line, just as another layer, that kind of cues Alex to know that I want this to happen with the snare drum. And then speaking to that too, the next cue, there's a little like almost like toy piano sample that lets us know this is the last time this is happening. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now Alex and I both know, no matter when we hear that, we're going on.
Yeah,
to the
we're
next
going on to the next thing. I mean, it's a cue, and it's like we have like open end to improvise, and then once we hear the cue, it's like you're going on. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's just like super fun to like have open-ended things like that, and then it's like, okay, like when I hear that, then I know I have another set of samples that are like available to me to be messing around with. And it's funny, just as we're playing this now, I'm like, oh, I want to dive into this one even a little bit harder, because there's a couple other things that I think would be cool to like start adding to this one too.